The Silvertips and Shamrocks stay undefeated. The Central continues to be a brawl, and the Warriors remain in limbo. All that and more hits now on the Junior Beast Pod on Crowlax TV.
That's Klucha, and he goes short side low.
The Rebels are right back in it. All alone, he's stopped by Luke West.
And Kerr, what? 7 seconds is all it took for Kerr.
Quick shot scores. Jacob Goudreau.
Takes a shot and buries that.
Week 4 is in the books and plenty to talk about. Teams making move up the standings, some teams sliding down in the standings. Keenen, how are you doing this week, and how have you been enjoying the lacrosse?
Mo, I'm doing great this week. A couple days ago covered the Rebels and Warriors game in Moyer. And man, I'm still riding a high off of that game. It was wild to end week 4 that way. But the lacrosse this year has been really good, and some surprises, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Score recap for week 3 and 4. Week 4 was moved a little bit slightly to be all midweek games, so we're on a bit of a break right now. But essentially, here's what you're looking at. Rebels defeating the Outlaws on May 10th by a score of 12-7. On Saturday, May 11th, the SWAT and the Crude playing 2 games. The SWAT taking out the Crude in both of those games. 13-12 and 14-10 were the final scores there. Calgary Chill knocking off the Warriors 12-7. Sunday, May 12th, the Crude end up taking it back to the SWAT, a 12-10 victory. Silvertips riding their hot streak, taking out the Warriors 10-5 at Plainsman Arena. And then this week on Thursday, the 16th, Outlaws taking the Crude down by a score of 10-6. And the Rebels and Warriors, a 7-7 tie that game. 3 goals in the last 2 minutes of the game for the Rebels to tie that game. Moving over to the South Division, Marauders knock off the Rampage 13-7. Shamrocks, a pair of wins against the Rockies, 12-4 and 27-4. Mavericks taking down the Marauders 12-10, and the Shamrocks continuing their dominance 13-7 against the Mounties on week 4. Moving into the Central Division, Mavericks take out the Rampage 8-4. Silvertips over the Chill 10-9. Marauders take out the Rampage 13-7. And then out in the East, had the SWAT again taking out the Crude there, and the Blizz and the Kings going 1-for-1, 11-6 victory for the Blizz on the Saturday, and Kings a 14-9 victory on the Sunday. And that's a look at week 3 and 4 as we head into this, I don't know what to call it, bye week, I guess, in a way, for some teams, but we'll touch on them a little later. Kings and Rebels are playing a triple header over the next few days on the long weekend.
So let's start out east. We'll travel out to the prairies where Queen City and Winnipeg went at it in a couple of games over the weekend in Winnipeg. And Winnipeg was able to take the first one by a score of 11-6, and Andy Angus comes up big with the hat trick. And then the next day on Sunday afternoon, Queen City was able to respond with a 14-9 win. And listen to this, Ryan McDonald, 6 goals and 4 assists. Ooh. Absolutely ridiculous. The type of stat line that you might see once a year league-wide. Just insane. The Kings, with that win, go to 3-1, and the Blizzard start their season off 1-1 in what I think will be a preview of the Eastern Final. Keenen, any thoughts on what's going out east? These are teams that we haven't really seen really anything of to this point, but I want to ask you while I have a chance here if you might have any insight or anything you want to add to what's going on in the Eastern Division.
The East Division is kind of one of those ones that I think is kind of flying under the radar this year. Like, you go and look at the standings in the East, and all these teams okay, yeah, sure, the Blizz have only played 2 games total, but they still have 1 win. It's 6-4-2 for points, and the Kings are leading that division. I mean, that's going to be a tight division, I think, and one that not many people, I think, expected to be as tight as we do. I'm curious to see around the halfway point how we're sitting in that division, but good lacrosse coming out of the East so far.
Yeah, and it's great to see newer markets. I mean, Winnipeg's been in the league for a while now, but Queen City, a pretty new addition. They went to the Founders last year as the Saskatchewan's representative, even though they didn't make it out of the Eastern Division. They went to the Founders, got that experience, and it looks like they're continuing to build on what is a pretty decent program out there right now. So moving on, we're gonna go out and we're gonna move down south where the Shamrocks continue to roll, now 6-0. They defeated the Mountaineers on Thursday night by a score of 13-7. And it was powered by a huge first period where they took it to the Mountaineers, outscoring them 7-2. The Mountaineers, meanwhile, they've played a pretty tough schedule to this point, but they've been in almost every game. And I'd watch out for them. I think they're a team that's going to continue to get better as the season moves along. They usually do. And I wouldn't want to play them in the first round of the playoffs, which is what Okotoks is going to have to deal with. And speaking of Okotoks, they did suffer a road loss at the Mavericks on Sunday afternoon by a score of 12-10. And, you know, this Okotoks team, they're a little bit Jekyll and Hyde, and I think the biggest hurdle for them is to start proving that they can beat some of the bigger boys in the league. But one thing that you can count on with Okotoks is some of their big guys to show up, and Cole Morris, probably one of the more consistent scorers in the RMLL Junior B circuit. He goes off for a hat trick. I believe he had 5 points in that game. And so he comes up big for them, but it wasn't a losing cause. They drop a little bit in the South standings. Actually, I still think they're in second, but they're going to be jostling with the Mountaineers, I think, all season long for home floor in that series. And sticking in the South, the Rockies did play the Shamrocks a little bit better this past weekend at home. Still suffered a couple, some tough losses, but at this point, like I touched on last week, there really isn't much to say, and I hope things do get better for Lethbridge down south. Keenen, any thoughts there on what's going down south of just south of us?
Well, touching on the Rockies like you were, I think we've seen glimpses. Wow, I can't speak today. Glimpses of kind of what could be for the Rockies, but they're just not finding that factor that just makes them click. And like we said, they have a good program down there. It's just hard to get those guys and just finding that thing that clicks. So I think just give them a few more years, and hopefully it doesn't take that long, but worst case scenario, you give them a few more years and hopefully something great comes out of there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a pass, Keenan. It is like midnight, so as we record this, so I'll let you off the hook for that one.
I appreciate that.
All right, so now let's go back up a little bit. I will go north to the Central, where the group of death continues to march along. The Silvertips remain undefeated, but they played a barn burner with the Chill on Friday. I did watch this late through the night on Friday, coaching a Tier 2 game, and got home and decided to watch it. And I was really impressed with what I saw. I thought the Silvertips are really good offensively. I really like their sets. They have quality ball movement. They scored a really nice 6-on-5 goal to win the game real late. And both teams, though, both teams' offenses looked very good. Lots of threats all over the floor. It was fast. That was one thing that also stood out with the Silvertips is they have some pretty quick guys in transition. They get up the floor. They head north fast. And so, I think they're a real contender. Time will tell, but I think they're undefeated for good reason. They did struggle a little bit with a shorthanded Warriors team on Sunday. Maybe they took them a little bit lightly, which I don't know how you do, even if they were shorthanded. But they had a 5-0 third period that catapulted them to the win. But they're looking pretty good in the Central. And then you've got the Mavericks that are hot on their tails, now 4-1-1 with a pair of wins over Red Deer. And Grayson Admonson, man, like 7 goals on Sunday afternoon. Like, that's inhumane. There's nothing else to say about that. The guy had the quote unquote Ovechkin hot stick. Everything that obviously he shot at the net was going in, and the Mavericks rode that to a big win over Okotoks 12-10. But this is, it's going to be they're going to be a tough out all season, really. I think when you talk about the Mavericks, they're going to play a physically imposing game, and they're going to work really hard, like I've said in the past. And they're really setting themselves up for a playoff spot in that division. Meanwhile, the Chill also picked up a couple of wins, pushing this division. The standings in this division got even that much tighter with that. They beat the Crude about 10 days ago now, and then they were able to beat the Warriors, needing a third period again, where the Warriors were right in at shorthanded. 15, 16 runners and a few affiliates, but the Chill had that big third period, much like the Silvertips did, and they now sit at 2-4. I believe they're tied with the Rampage for that last playoff spot in the Central. Get this, and they're 2-4, but they're +6. So that tells you a lot of their story. I mean, they've lost some really close games. The games they've won by margin. So that's another team that I'd be wary of moving forward, and I do expect them to make the playoffs. Now, meanwhile, Red Deer, they dropped that game on Friday night to the Mavericks. I believe the score was 8-4, and I think some of that lack of offense and creativity is sort of catching up with them. And I don't know, like, Carson Wells can only do so much. Obviously, he's probably the best goaltender in the league, and that's great for Red Deer. But they're going to need to figure out some things because they can't win games consistently 4-2. And so I think that's, if you're going to look at Red Deer and you're going to kind of think about how they project forward, they need to figure out their offense and get some flow going there. Keenen, thoughts in the Central?
Like you said, we always talk about how this is the group of death this year. And I think the more we keep going into the season, the more it just shows, quite frankly. Like, okay, we can talk about the Rampage being 2-3 right now, but the games that they've won have been out of division games. So that's where I'm hesitant with the Rampage on how are they going to essentially fare in their own division if they make the playoffs over the Chill. And speaking of making the playoffs, at the start of the year, looking at the Mavericks roster, didn't really think much of it. And personally, I think I underestimated what the Mavericks were capable of. And the Mavericks have proved me wrong on multiple occasions. I mean, the 4-1-1 record speaks for itself. Like, that is a team that I honestly think will challenge the Silvertips come into the playoff time. I don't think we haven't seen we have seen one matchup with the Silvertips and Mavericks, and the Silvertips took that one 7-1, but that was week 1. These teams don't meet again until Saturday, June 1st. And I'm curious come the start of June to see how that game's going to come out once these teams now have kind of some experience under their feet, and just seeing who's going to come out on top there, because it is going to be a fight between those two teams. Like, 3 points separate them in the standings, but realistically, if the Mavericks and Crude in week 1 didn't tie, that's a 1-game swing. You beat the Silvertips once, and all of a sudden that's a 4-point swing. I mean, come on, man. That's killer. So the Mavericks, I think, are going to be challenging the Silvertips up top there. I agree with you about the Rampage. I believe they're just having offensive struggles right now. Carson Wells standing on his head. right now, 85.9 save percentage. Dude's just a beast for that team. He is the absolute sparkle on the Rampage at the moment. For the Rampage sake, that's a team we saw in Larry Bishop last year, and for their sake, maybe they'll make it again. But that Central Division, man, that is going to be continue to be the killer as we trounce along through the season.
Yeah, and you were talking about the Mavericks, and part of it is they're out in the hinterland. A lot of people in Edmonton, a lot of people in Calgary, a lot of people in the major centers don't really know their personnel very well. They're not very familiar with what their identity is. But I've said it in the past, and I'll say it again. They come prepared to work. They come to the arena thinking that they have every chance to win, and that's huge. Like belief in your team and belief in yourself. And I think Trey Christensen instills that in those guys, and that makes them very dangerous. And on that same note, I think Red Deer in the past, but it's both of those teams. That's a bit of an odd trip, right? Like you'll see them play a lot of games on like Sunday at 5 and whatever. It's a bit of an odd kind of, I don't know. It's an odd setup when you're playing those teams. You might have guys that were out all night, Saturday night, whatever, right? I'm surmising here, but they're a little bit they're strange spots at times, and it makes playing them that much more difficult. And in the past, Red Deer has been a team that will press and will be very physical with you. And I haven't seen them play this year, so I can't really comment on that. But if they haven't been doing that, maybe that's something they start to do to try and create more possession and more turnovers and things like that. So, if I'm Red Deer though, I'm trying to think of ways that I can create a little bit more and make it more difficult on other teams to keep up with me. So now we're gonna move finally to the north here, where there's a little bit of chaos going on. I mean, the Crude and the Outlaws play last night, and the Crude suffer a devastating loss, really, to their playoff hopes. They lose for a second time in as many games to the Outlaws, this time by a score of 10-7. And Keenan, I was high. I still think they drafted very well. And I was high on them going into the season. Just watching them play, though, I find that they're having trouble accessing the middle of the floor offensively, and they give it up, but they surrender the middle of the floor pretty easily defensively. And when you're that type of team, it's very tough to win games. I mean, that's the core aspect of lacrosse, right? You want to gain high danger areas of the floor, and you want to prevent the other team from gaining high danger areas of the floor. And the Crude have struggled with that. They've had some goaltending issues. Horn hasn't been healthy all season. So I think they're in a tough spot. I know there's things going on, like there's some locker room issues, some malcontents, and I don't know what's going to happen there, but I know Terry, and I know he'll be prepared to do what he needs to do for the good of the program. So look out for some things, maybe some changes to develop there. The Outlaws, meanwhile, that's a huge win for them, and they're playing, I think, with a lot more effort and a lot more focus this year. Biggest difference for them, I think, Reed McLeod. He's given them some stability, and when they do make those mistakes, they're much more likely to get that big save. And he made some really big saves, especially in the first half of that Crude game last night. So I think the rookie deserves a lot of credit, and I also think that they're making a lot fewer mistakes in reverse transition. They're getting on and off the floor better, playing better defense. I think you can credit that to head coach Phil Smythe. I think he's done some good things there, and Ethan Forgrave offensively, student of the game, and I think those guys have the opportunity to learn a lot from him. So I think the Outlaws deserve some credit, in the direction they're moving. Meanwhile, last night also, the Warriors and Rebels went at it. The Rebels only playing their third game of the season, but I mean, Keenan, this is another thing I know I talked about earlier on in the season, or maybe even in the preview. that the Rebels are just always feisty, they're always resilient, and they're always right there. And that was no more evident than in this game where they were down 7-4 to the Warriors. Obviously a team that's used to winning, down 7-4 with 2:10 to go, and they rattle off goals. Eastwood with 2:09 to go, Kohut with 1:34 to go or 1:39, something like that, and then Kohut again at like 1:15. So 3 goals in less than a minute in the final 2 minutes to tie it. And they're a much younger team this year than last year or even the last couple of years, but they just have that competitive drive that's instilled with them, and they're a tough team to beat. They just are. Like, they're gonna show up, and they're gonna, if they fall down, they're gonna be able to get back up. They don't really get too down or too high. They're pretty level headed that way, and I think they deserve some credit. That's a big result for them, even though it's not a win. It keeps them sort of within range of the Warriors. The Warriors now going 0-2-1 this past week. And I'll transition into talking about those defending champs here. They have major injury issues. I know Ben Royer's been out and Dickin has been out. They've had guys playing A, trying to find out if they're making the team. They've got guys like Golka who haven't come back from school, and they don't know if he's on the minors or if he's going to be on their team or if he's going to affiliate. Same thing with Simonson, who's been back. He's played a game, but then he didn't play last night. I think he was at minors practice from what some of the players told me. So, yeah, they're just in limbo. Like I said off the top, the Warriors are in limbo. They're 500 right now, and their season is going to be really interesting to follow. Because you just don't know what they're going to have at their disposal. I still think they're dangerous. I think they're right up there with some of the top teams in the league. How strong are they? I think time will tell.
I agree with you with the Warriors, and like looking up and down the North, I think the North is one of the more intriguing divisions. These are all teams that are essentially 500 and lower. Every single team is 500 and lower, which is very odd for the North, given what we've seen in recent years. Starting with the Warriors, with part of the team in limbo, a big problem I'm finding, and the reason they're sitting 2-2-1 to start the year, even after starting the year 2-0, they just can't close out games. They're having issues closing out games. Okay, sure, we didn't see it as much with the Chill, but the game against the Silvertips, they were tied 5-5 heading into the third, and the Silvertips outscored them 5-0 in the third. Against the Rebels, basically 2 minutes to go, you're up by 3, and that win's gone, and it ends in a tie. So the Warriors, I think, are just not able to find ways to close out. And I don't know if that's the guys that are missing, that they're just hurting because of that, or if they're just getting unlucky bounces. Like the Rebels, 3 goals in less than 2 minutes, that is unheard of, but you've got to have just the right bounces for that. Getting 5 unanswered goals in one period, that's another thing that I think comes down to luck. So I just think things just, even though most of the Warriors are clicking, they're just not getting the luck that they need. And I think with still, 3/4 of their season left, they still have time to turn that around. And on the flip side of things, you look at the Crude, they're almost halfway done their season. I mean, yeah, they played 3 games against the SWAT this past week, the last couple weeks, but they've played 8 games. They're 1-6-1. And honestly, I had them rated as potentially taking the division, and I don't think the Crude expected this in the slightest. I think the Crude expected to be a lot better, and you look at their schedule, and I don't want to say it's necessarily the easy part of their schedule they've played, but for sake of brevity, they've went 1-6-1 in the easy part of their schedule. They've still got games coming up. Like they got the Kings, they've got the Mounties, they've got the Rebels a couple times, they've got the Silver Tips, Shamrocks. Like these aren't easy teams for them. So the Crude need to get what the Warriors aren't getting, which is luck. The Crude need the luck if they're even going to squeak into the playoffs in the North.
Yeah, I'd be careful with the word luck though, because with what's going on with the Warriors isn't really anything to do with luck. It's just they're in a situation where they've got they've got things going on around them that are preventing them from fielding a team like a full squad right now. And I think that for them, it's as soon as whoever it is, whether they lose Ben Royer or they lose Simonson or they lose, Golka or Stashnik, whoever it is, right? They're going to lose a couple guys, let's say. I think once they know who it is, they can sort of move on and get full 18 guys into the lineup each night. That's going to make a world of difference for them. Like this past weekend, like I said, they had 15, 16 guys. 3 of them were affiliates off my tier 2 team. And shout out to those guys. They're getting a lot of experience and I think they're doing a really good job. One of them even made the team permanently over the weekend. So, Blake Cameron. So shout out to him. Good job. But they're just down bodies right now. They just got to get healthy and they've got to get their roster set. That's really what it comes down to. And yeah, as far as the Crude, I feel for them because I don't think anybody saw this coming with them this year. I thought they really did make strides. I think they still have, even though it hasn't shown in the results. But there are things that definitely need to be figured out there because, like I know I was telling you about their schedule. They really have played what you would call the easier half or almost half of their schedule. And now, they're going to start to see a bunch of Silver Tips and Shamrocks and Rebels and Warriors. So it's going to be an uphill climb there. As always, if you want to reach me, feel free to hit me up at MJ_9 on Twitter, m.joma on Instagram, whatever it is, anything lacrosse related. If you want to talk about a game you saw, some of the teams that you're thinking might go deep in this year's playoffs or provincials or have potential, maybe have founders aspirations, a player you want to talk about or have mentioned on the podcast, especially if you're a coach, hit me up. And, love the interaction and love the correspondence.
Be sure to follow us at Crowlax TV, Instagram, X, and Facebook. And I will be away next week, but Muhammad, you got a great show planned next week for the Junior Beast.
Yeah, Keenan. So next week we are going to have head coach of the Warriors, Vadiep, talk with us about their founders' experience last year, what it was like bringing home the national championship, and we'll talk a little bit about their journey there and everything that went with that. And we'll also have a player or two to give their perspective on what it was like on the road to national glory. We'll also talk about a few things that are going on around the league. We'll have the Rebels and Kings series that's going on this weekend to talk about. And anything else that might come up in the meantime, we'll also throw in there. But yeah, tune in next week and we'll have a good sit down with head coach Vadiep and get to know a little bit about what it was like winning the Founders Cup last year.
Well, while it is a quiet week on Crow, it certainly won't be in the lacrosse world. And I know I look forward to listening to that show next week, Muhammad. So thank you so much. For Muhammad, my name is Keenan. Thank you so much for tuning into the Junior Beast podcast right here on Crowlax TV. Again, make sure to subscribe if you have not already. Hit that notification bell as we go live for 9 different teams this year, all across the RMLL. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you next week.